Very good evening to all of you. I hope you are fresh after a tea break now. So we'll be talking about burns. This is often a neglected topic because many of us do not see such patients of burns on a regular day-to-day basis. So most of these patients go to specialized centers, but every now and then we do come across such patients because we are all dealing with acute care. So these patients do present to our emergencies on a very regular basis. So we have to know at least about the resuscitation of the burn patient and what complications are we supposed to know about and how are we supposed to handle those complications. And as far as the examinations are concerned, generally there is at least one question about burns. So it is again a very important topic. So if you look at the classification of burn patient, it depends upon the depth, type and extent of injury. So it is very, very important to know whenever a patient of burn comes to us, we have to see the depth, type and extent because our prognosis, our treatment, our management, everything depends on these three factors. So when we look at the types of burn, we all know thermal burn, electrical burn, chemical burn and frostbite. Most of the times we deal with thermal and electrical burn, but chemical burn and frostbite are also, we must know at least the basics about these burn types of burns injury also. Now when we talk about the depth of burns, we all know that the first degree burn will involve only the superficial layer, that is the epidermis. But when you look at the second degree, it is further subclassified into superficial and deep second degree burn. Superficial is only when the superficial layer of the dermis is involved, and deep second degree is when the hair follicles are also involved. Third degree is subcutaneous fat, and fourth degree is when all the other tissues, even up to the extent of muscles, bone, everything is involved. That is called the fourth degree burns. So when you look at it clinically, a typical example is a sunburn. So you will see this only the superficial layers are involved. Tissue with Blanchfield pressure. There is erythematous, and these are erythematous and often very, very painful and involves minimal tissue damage. The healing of these kinds of burn is very, very efficient. Most of these patients will show full recovery. There would not be any residual effect because of these burns. But when you look at the second degree of burn, as you can see, the skin is swollen. So there is a lot of edema associated with this kind of burn. This involves the superficial layer of the dermis, referred to as partial thickness burns. Epidermis and portion of the dermis are involved. It will involve sweat glands, hair follicles, etc. And these are again very, very painful. Edema is decreased, blood flow in tissue can convert to a full thickness burn. So that is the danger with this kind of burn, that because of the edema it can progress further and it can involve other non-involved areas. When initially the areas which are non-involved can also become involved, and it can go deeper to become a full thickness burn. So this is our third degree burn will look like. So as you can see, there is blackening, and there are areas of edema and reddish discoloration also. So it is certain areas have got third degree burn, but the surrounding areas have got edema and they have got second degree burns. And again, if this edema progresses because of the cell death, this can involve the deeper layers also. Coagulated vessels can be seen. Many times you will see associated with deep burns, these are less painful because all these the pain would be because of this, because of the severe tissue damage, the pain is not there. But because of superficial layer involvement also, you will see some amount of pain because of second degree burn. And this is how a fourth degree burn is going to look like. So these are very serious kind of burns, and as you can see, there is complete involvement of the tissues, the bones, the muscles, everything is involved. Now looking at the burn extent, again, we all understand that our management depends upon the body surface area involved. The larger the body surface area involved, the more aggressive resuscitation is required and poorer is the outcome. So the morbidity, mortality depends heavily on the extent of burns. But again, we have to understand that this will apply, the extent will apply only to second and third degree burns. It does not apply to first degree and the fourth degree burns. How do we measure areas of burns? We all know this. Rule of 9. This is the easiest way and this is most widely applied. And all of us, whenever we are answering questions, the MCQs also when we are answering, this is the rule which we generally apply. So I will not be going into detail, but if this is another formula, that is the London-Broder formula. This is applicable for children because it takes into account the head size of the children. So depending upon the age of the patient, you can determine the surface area of burns involved. So this is the formula, and there is another one which is the rule of palms. So depending upon the area of burn, this is used for small areas of or patchy areas of burn. So you just apply your palm, and the area which your palm is covering, that is referred to as 1%. So depending upon the area involved, you can have a rough estimate of the burns area involved. Not all patients would require ICU, but you must treat every patient of burn as a multi-trauma patient, and you have to evaluate them very, very carefully, and you should keep a low threshold of admitting these patients to ICU. But there are strict criteria which can be helpful in determining which patient of burns is going to require ICU care. Any patient with more than 5% BSA involved with full thickness, or more than 10% area involved in partial thickness, any full thickness or partial thickness burn involving the critical areas, that is the face, hands, feet, genital, skin over major joint, children with severe burns, circumferential areas of thorax or extremities. Why? Extremities, because they can lead to compartment syndrome. So these patients will require some kind of surgery or a release of the pressure in the compartment. And thorax, again, because it can cause compartment syndrome, it will restrict the movement of the chest, and these patients are at high risk of going into respiratory failure. So these patients should be admitted in the ICU. Significant chemical injury, electrical burns, and the signs and symptoms associated with inhalation injury. Why again inhalation injury? Because of airway protection, because again these patients are at high risk of developing respiratory dysfunction, high risk of choking, because you must understand that the edema which is developing in the superficial areas, which we can notice, that is also developing into the deeper tissue, especially the neck. So if there is a lot of edema developing, which develops very rapidly in the first few hours after burn, they can compromise the airway of these patients. So that's why again you need to keep a very low threshold of intubating these patients. History taking is again very, very important, because our management depends upon from the time of the burns, not from the time when the patient presents to us. So our resuscitation should take into account when the burn process started. So and again the type of injury, whether the patient is having any multi-trauma, if the patient has got any inhalation injury, all those things will depend upon the details of the incident. So that's why it is important for us to know the cause of burn, time of injury, place of occurrence, whether close space or not, presence of chemicals, noxious fumes. If all these things are present, if the history is significant, then you should think of inhalation injury. Likelihood of associated trauma, as I told you, all these patients should be considered as multi-trauma patient until another proved otherwise. And what pre-hospital interventions have done, whether the fluid resuscitation has been started before that or not, whether the burning process has been started before that or not, all those stopped before that or not, all these things have to be taken into account. So the initial patient treatment includes the stopping the burning process. If the patient is still getting exposed to the smoke, you have to remove the patient from that side. Consider burn patient as I already told you, perform the ABCDE, avoid hypothermia, remove constricted clothing and jewelry. ABCDE is again the same: airway, breathing, circulation, but there is some difference in the D and E. That is, D stands for depth of burn and E stands for extent of injury, that you must evaluate, and because your management is going to depend on these two factors. As I told you, airway considerations, very, very important. You must keep a low threshold because edema is going to compromise the airway very soon. So maintain low threshold. Swelling is rapid, especially in the first 24 hours. Consider RSI to facilitate intubation. Cautious use of succinylcholine, because hyperkalemia is very, very common in these patients. So you should prevent, should avoid using succinylcholine. Prior intubation attempt, you should always consider these patients as going to be having difficult airways. So you should always be prepared for a difficult airway management. You should keep smaller size tubes with you. You should be prepared to do emergency cricothyrotomy or tracheostomy, and utilize EtCO2 to ensure that your airway is in place. As I was telling you, because of the smoke and the toxic fumes which the patient might have got exposed to, the airway edema can happen. But the kind of airway edema or the extent of airway edema is going to depend upon the kind of steam or kind of exposure the patient has suffered. So if it is only hot air and steam, there will be edema in the upper airway only. Okay, so it will lead to laryngeal obstruction and bronchospasm. But the smoke and the hot particles or the aspiration will involve the lower airways and the irritant gases that can cause chemical infection. So these are all thermal injuries, and this can cause, because of the chemical injury, this can lead to pneumonia, pulmonary edema and alveolar capillary defect. So these patients, again, if there is a history of inhalation injury, these patients are at high risk of developing ARDS, pulmonary edema. So these patients should be managed accordingly. So indicators of airway injury, again, the first is whether the history, as per the history, the patient was confined to a enclosed space or not, stridor, soot in airway, thick nasal hair, facial burn, change in voice or hoarseness of voice, brassy cough, or if the patient is coughing out carbonaceous sputum. So if any of these things are present, then you must think of injury to the airways and you should try to intubate these patients at an earlier stage. Again, as I told you, criteria for intubation, any of those previous risk factors are there, then you should keep a low threshold and you should think about intubating the patient. Or if there are signs and symptoms of neck edema or injury to the face, then again you should think about intubating such patients. Again, burns involving more than 50% of total body surface area, even though if there is no signs or symptoms suggestive of airway, immediate threat to the airway, these patients should also be intubated. Because what happens is the edema in any patient who has got more than 30% of burns, edema is going to develop very rapidly, and it is going to involve not only the sites which have got burned, it is going to involve the distal sites also, and such patients are again at risk of developing airway compromise. Classically, if you look at the patient of burn, the complications or the effect on our body are divided into two phases. That is, the first phase is in the first 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours, which is also called the ebb phase. So basically what is happening, everything is slowing down. The heart rate is, although the tachycardia would be there because of the pain or the patient might be restless, but the cardiac output has got reduced. Why? Because the cardiac output, cardiac index, everything gets reduced. Why? Because of the direct effect of the burns and also because of the SVR and PVR. The SVR increases in the first 24-48 hours. So because of that, the blood supply to the different organs get reduced. So this is termed as the ebb phase. So the patient will present with altered mental status. Pulmonary edema can happen, especially if the patient has got inhalation injury of smoke, and the urine output might get reduced, but it is because of the myoglobinuria or because of the dehydration associated with the early phase. And obviously you have to look for other signs or other complications. But after 48 hours, what happens? The patient goes into hypermetabolic, hyperdynamic state. The cardiac output increases. The SVR will reduce. The cardiac index also increases. So the blood flow to all the organs is increasing at this point of time. So patients, although the tubular function is going to get reduced because of the other complications, the GFR and the blood supply to the kidneys, to the other organs, everything increases. Patient will show signs of multi-organ dysfunction. There will be anemia, immunosuppression, osteoporosis, and this is the time when the patient is more prone for getting all these infections, the dreaded infections which we are worried about. So if you look at this is a multi-organ dysfunction kind of situation when all the organ systems of the body are getting affected. Another important thing is the altered pharmacological responses. The burn patients, a lot of drugs you will see, especially the sedation, especially the painkillers. Even there have been studies which have shown that drugs like common anesthetic drugs, even fentanyl, dexmedetomidine, all these, the efficacy of these drugs reduces in patients of burns. So the dose required by these patients may be much higher than what you will anticipate with other patients. As I told you, edema is the greatest, is one of the major complications associated with burns. It will lead to fluid loss, protein loss, and it can also spread to other organ systems, including the airways, and it can compromise the airway of these patients. So any patient with burn surface of more than 30% edema develops in all body tissue, including the non-burns area. So again, this has got vital implications for our patient care. Impaired peripheral perfusion can be due to mechanical compression. So such patients, especially if there is a circumferential burn, so to release the pressure in the compartment, you might have to do an early surgery. Hysterotomy might be required to reduce the pressures. Fluid resuscitation, again, we all know that there is lot of insensible losses happening, lot of edema happening, lot of protein is losing. So although the patient might not be like in other patients of trauma, you will see the hematocrit is on the lower side. So in such patients, hematocrit might be on the higher side, but still these patients are, and obviously these patients are very, very hypovolemic. So you have to resuscitate these patients very aggressively. Any formulas you remember? Yes, so for which fluid it is used? RL. So now there are more and more studies which are suggesting you can use other balanced solutions also instead of RL. Also, but this is still the Ringer lactate is the preferred solution. You should avoid using solutions with lot of glucose. So the formula which is generally recommended is the Parkland formula. That is what you are supposed to use when you are writing your exam. But can somebody tell me that whether colloids can be used or not? No. Lot of protein is getting lost, and you are talking about liters and liters of fluid for resuscitation. Sorry. See, now again there is a lot of literature which is suggesting that you can use colloids also, and although it is not available in the guidelines because there are no specific guidelines as such, but there are formulas which have been devised specially for use of colloids, and you can use colloids in resuscitation. Although there is no distinct survival advantage or any other advantage which has been shown with colloid resuscitation. So two large bore cannulas, like for all trauma patients, time for injury you have to calculate. It is not from the time when the patient has presented to you. So that is important. The fluid resuscitation has to take account whatever time loss the patient has already had. This is the Parkland formula, 4 cc Ringer lactate into body surface area into patient's body weight. So this is formula, you have to remember this. Half of it has to be given in the first 8 hours starting from the time of injury. Again, I am just trying to re-emphasize. The balance has to be given in the next 16 hours. So this formula is applicable only for the first 24 hours. There are other formulas also, like this Galveston formula. This has been widely used in a pediatric patient because this depends upon the meter square. It is not about the kg. This is about the body surface area. 500 cc per meter square body surface area, that is the resuscitation, and for maintenance 2000 cc per meter square for 24 hours maintenance. This is, as I told you, there are two formulas. This is Muir and Barclay formula, and the other is the Brooks formula. So both of these have been devised for using colloids. Okay, so this is for colloids, and the colloid which they have suggested is 4.5% albumin. Although this is not available with us, what we are using is the 5% albumin, which is easily available with all of us. So this they have divided into the different time frames: 4 hours, 4 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours. So this goes beyond the first 24 hours. This is for colloid, and you have to start crystalloids also at the rate of 1 ml per kg per hour for maintenance. The Brook formula suggests 0.5 ml per kg per percentage of body surface area. Again, they have recommended 5% albumin for resuscitation. Other complication, which is very common complication, is hypothermia. Such patients, if they have got hypothermia, as I told you, patients can be hypercoagulable. These patients can end up in the triangle of death. So you have to avoid the triangle of death, and the complication rates are much higher. So you have to avoid hypothermia in all these patients to improve outcome. For that, you can cover the patient with a dry sheet, pre-warm the trauma room. You have to give warm saline for fluid resuscitation. Avoid saline-soaked bandages. Avoid prolonged irrigation. Avoid application of antimicrobial creams, paralytic agents, and continual monitoring of core temperature is advisable. Lab studies. Obviously, apart from the basic labs which we are doing for most of our patients of trauma, what is important is to do a CPK, urine myoglobin, and a 12-lead EKG. This is again more important in patient with electric burns. Why? I cannot make out. Anyways, we'll be talking about electric burns. These are the basic imaging studies which we need to do. Burn injury, wound management. So all patients of burn require surgery. Any criteria? When would you ask a surgeon to have a look at your burn patient? If the patient has got deeper burns, or if the patient needs a hysterectomy, if there is any signs of compartment syndrome, or any burn patient who is, those wounds are not healing. So you would expect complete recovery of burn patients, especially if the patient has got first degree and second degree burns. But any patient who has got involvement of the deeper layer of the skin will require some kind of surgical intervention for proper wound healing and for complete wound healing. Otherwise, there will be some amount of morbidity which will be left. So these are the things which you can do. Superficial and small burns will heal within 2 weeks. So they will show complete recovery in 2 weeks. If the burn patient is not improving with superficial burn in 2 weeks time, then again surgical intervention might be required, or these might be infected burns and you have to look into infection side of the picture. Large deep burns will heal within 2 to 3 weeks. Any burn not healed after 3 weeks needs grafting. Okay, so some kind of surgical intervention might be required in many patients. Open dressing versus closed dressings, the jury is still out. There is no clear-cut guideline. If you do a closed dressing, the chances of infections are on the higher side. In the first few weeks, you will see, rather first few days, you will see the chances of which infections are more in the first few days. Gram positive, gram negative, fungal. Gram positive, because they are the normal commensals of the skin. So in the first few days you will see the gram positive infections which are predominant, but later on, because of the hospital acquired infections, you will see more of gram negative infection. So with closed dressings, the chances of Pseudomonas infections are on the more side, but with open dressings, it can cause a lot of heat and fluid loss. Again, you have to balance between the two, and the guidelines, there are no specific guidelines which suggest that one particular dressing is better than the other. So moist wound healing, increased activity, and all these growth factors have been tried. Silver impregnated, gold impregnated, all these dressings are available, but none have been proved to be superior to others. Topical antibiotic. Yes, no? No. Again, there is no role of any prophylactic antibiotics. It should not be done. And there are complications of topical agents which we have already discussed. Again, if there are any signs and symptoms of suggestive of infection like dark grey experience, purulent discharge, systemic signs of sepsis, then obviously the antibiotics are indicated. Otherwise, there is no role of prophylactic antibiotics. Nutritional support, again, very, very important. These patients are hypercatabolic, in hypercatabolic state. They require a lot of the calorie requirements. The protein loss is also there. So the calorie requirement, protein requirement is significant. This is one of the formulas which have been devised and utilized in patients with burn, the Cureri formula, which can be used, but it generally overestimates the calorie needs. But this is one of the formulas which have been applied for nutritional support. Generally, these patients do require high calorie, high protein nutritional support. Again, because edema is already significant, but if again in spite of so much edema, if your patient is losing weight, that is troublesome, and there should not be any reduction of weight by more than 1% of baseline per day for more than 5 days. Tetanus toxide has to be given, debride and treat the wound. Debridement of intact blister is still controversial. So if the blister has already opened up, then you can do debridement, further debridement, otherwise intact blister is controversial. Surgical interventions, as I told you, deep second degree burns of any type that are heavily contaminated, third degree circumferential burns with suspected compartment syndrome, or circumferential burns around the closed compartments like the wrist. So these are the indications of early intervention or early surgery. Moving on to carbon monoxide poisoning. Do you know what is the treatment of carbon monoxide poisoning? Oxygen. Hyperbaric oxygen? Yes? No? Any specific indications? Yes. If the patient has got signs and symptoms of severe carbon monoxide toxicity, like if the patient is unconscious, or the patient is hypotensive, or a pregnant patient, or the patient who is not showing any signs of recovery after giving a normal oxygen, that is 100% oxygen, these are the few indications of hyperbaric oxygen, but otherwise it would not be required in most of these patients. Carbon monoxide, we know it has got a high binding capacity for hemoglobin, and it dissociates oxygen from the hemoglobin and results in decreased oxygen delivery to tissues. The first signs and symptoms are? Headache. Yes, headache. Headache is the first sign, and most of the early signs and symptoms are because of the brain involvement, but death is due to myocardial dysfunction. So early symptoms are neurological, but death is due to myocardial symptoms. So usually symptoms do not present until 15% of the hemoglobin is bound to carbon monoxide. Early symptoms are neurological. Patient can present with confusion, irritable, restless, tachycardia, arrhythmias, vomiting, incontinence, dilated pupils, bounding pulse, cyanotic complexion, seizures, and cherry red color is rarely seen. Okay, and if cherry red color is seen, it requires a lot of carboxyhemoglobin levels to be really on the higher side. Then only you will see this typical cherry red color. Otherwise, you will see normal blood color. This is the classical teaching that the signs and symptoms will depend upon the level of carboxyhemoglobin, but it does not hold true any longer. Okay, so this is only in the classical teaching. But yes, the higher the level of carboxyhemoglobin levels, the higher the chances of complication and higher the chances of mortality. Treatment: remove the patient from the source, administer 100% high flow oxygen, and what it does is it reduces the half-life of carboxyhemoglobin. So if the patient is breathing room air, the time required for carboxyhemoglobin, the half-life is around 120 to 200 minutes. If the patient is breathing 100% oxygen, then the half-life of carboxyhemoglobin is reduced to 30 minutes. So that's why it is beneficial and it can be life-saving. Moving to electrical burns. Again, the depth and the extent of burns can be misleading in these patients. So if the type of burn you are expecting is the electrical burn, you have to look for the entry site and exit site. And many a times you will see that both these things are very, very small. The entry site and exit site are very, very small. But why it's important is to know the level or the extent of burn, the way the electric energy has traveled inside the patient's body, and what all organ systems it could have involved. So suppose if the entry wound is on this side and the exit is on this side, so that means the electricity has passed through the patient's body, involving the obviously the skeletal muscles, including the lungs and the heart. So the chances of complication, if the heart is involved, are definitely on the higher side. Lot of internal tissue damage can happen. That's why you have to monitor the CPK levels in these patients. You have to monitor the potassium levels in these patients, because these patients can have rhabdomyolysis, these patients can have hyperkalemia. And most common cause of death again in these patients are the cardiac arrhythmias, especially if the electricity has passed through the heart. So to summarize, burn patients require early aggressive care, and you must treat these patients as patients with polytrauma. Management depends upon the type, extent and depth of burns. And complications like hypothermia, hyperkalemia and rhabdomyolysis should not be missed because these can be life-threatening. Thank you.